Hi everyone. In this particular session, we are going to discuss something very interesting. So, welcome everyone. Welcome back everyone to the MLOps Basics series. In this series, we are referring to the deep learning blocks by Raviraja Ganta. Today, we are, I think, doing the session 11 of this series. If you haven't watched, please, I'll recommend, please go ahead and watch the previous sessions. In this particular session, we are going to discuss about the container registry, and basically, in this particularly, we will discuss about the AWS ECR. So in this particularly, if you can see from the flowchart, I'll delve much deeper into this flowchart in which what happens, we as a data scientist, we quantize we package our model with the help of Onyx, then use the data version control for data version controlling, and then push the image to AWS S3. Then in AWS S3, we are particularly saving the checkpoint or the model, and then we fetch that particular model from S3 when we trigger the CI/CD type pipeline, and those things are evaluated using the GitHub Actions, and then based on once our action is approved, we go and build a Docker image with trained model and push that thing particularly to the Amazon ECR. So here exactly what is a container registry. So container registry is nothing but a place to store container images. For example, if earlier if you know like we were using Docker. So if you there's a platform or service by Docker known as Docker Hub where you can push your images that you have. Uh, and one of the things is in this example particularly we'll be discussing about one of the services by Amazon, the AWS ECR. Similarly, Google Azure and everyone has their own container registry service. But in this particular session, we'll be discussing about the AWS ECR. And a container image is nothing but it is a file comprised of multiple layers which can execute applications in a single instance. Hosting all the images in one stored location allows us as users to commit, identify, and pull images when needed. So before moving to AWS Container Registry, there are a couple of things that we will be discussing in this particular session. First is basics of S3, programmatic access to S3, configuring AWS S3, access remote storage, and then we'll move to basics of ECR and then configuring GitHub Actions to use S3 and ECR. So if we'll be using S3 and ECR, what we are trying to do is trying to standardize our base as AWS services so that it's easier for us to push, pull, and do everything that we want at just few platforms. So basic of S3, I think as we are doing this course, and since we are much more inclined towards the different segments of ML ops, I'll go over only a brief of what S3 and the different AWS services are. So AWS S3 is nothing but just a simple storage service. Think of it as a Google Drive, but it has a lot of functionalities when you want to access it using the APIs. So that's it. And in AWS S3, there are a few things that you need to know. One, data in S3 is organized in form of buckets. A bucket is a single logical unit of storage in S3, and a bucket contains object which contains the data and metadata. And uh, before adding any data in S3, we as users need to create a bucket which will be used to store objects. For example, consider buckets as a directory in Google Drive. That's it. Creating a bucket. So this is like doing this thing manually, and then we will go do these things using the programmatic access. So first you go and log in into AWS, then go to S3, create a bucket. In bucket you add details and then create bucket. Once you have created the bucket, you can upload the samples file in that bucket. So now we'll do these things using the programmatically access. So in this, you go to my, so for this thing, you'll be needing the tokens and the secret credentials. For that, you go to AWS, my security credentials, get the access key. If you do not have till now, create a new access key. And then you go to the AWS CLI, and there particularly, you need to put these credentials. So for if you do not have CLI, AWS CLI, you do pip install AWS CLI and try to use this documentation, these links to set up. And then particularly once you have set up the credentials, you do AWS S3 and list S3 model DVC. What's inside this? So inside this, there's a sample.txt that we just created above. and accessing S3 using Python. So we just do pip install Boto3. Boto3 is one of the library which helps us to integrate, access and access and work with the AWS SDK for Python. So import Boto3, Boto3 resources. S in this you mentioned S3, in that you mentioned the bucket that we have is model DVC. And then configuring AWS S3 as a remote storage in DVC. So we'll go DVC. In DVC, we install S3. We do DVC in it. Uh, and then particularly in your configure the remote storage to the S3 location. Go to S3 location, copy S3 URL. And similar to how we do git remote add, similar to that, you add like git remote, DVC remote add, and and you give the path of the S3 location. And now let's do what we are doing. We are going to cd DVC files, and in DVC we are adding this model.onx file in the DVC, train model DVC. And then we are pushing the train model.dvc into our S3 bucket. So now basically we have pushed our Docker, the train model that we have. I think the train model that we have pushed that particular model.onx as a train model.dvc into our DVC bucket, into our S3 bucket. And now we are using, now we'll be using AWS ECR, Elastic Container Registry Service, to do the next steps. So for earlier, what was happening is in the earlier we were discussing about building container using CI/CD, but the image that we have like was not persisted anywhere for further usage. This is where S container registry comes into the picture. So we'll go. So in this particularly, what's happening is we create an image, we push that thing into the Amazon ECR, and then through that we do version everything, we do anything, and then run and build, and then we can run those particular containers on like a two three different on a lot of different places. But generally if we use AWS, we'll either use Amazon ECS. If you're running these containers using as a Kubernetes cluster, then we would have been using Amazon EKS, or maybe sometimes we can also run on our own premises. So here what you need to do is go to the ECR Amazon AWS, search ECR, get started, create a directory known as MLOps basics, create a repo name as MLOps basics, and then let's build a Docker image and push it to ECR. So for that earlier we need to write a Docker file. In that we'll modify some of the things is AWS credentials configuration and DVC S3. And in this, we are adding this remote add. Finally, we will be building the Docker image using this thing. And then once everything is done, we will push this image to our ECR. And for like I think we have not mentioned much things here, but like if you're on the ECS service link, there's a button known as View Push Commands. If you click on that, there will be a pop-up that will be open, and it will show you all the commands for and why exactly for what steps, which command you have to use. So for first command, like we'll be using is like for authenticating Docker client to ECR. We just enter this thing in which we pass on our credentials and the this is I think the which of the Amazon servers that we are using, that particular ID is using. Then we tag that particular image that this is MLOps basics latest, and then finally we push the image, Docker push. And then now we are, so earlier we were using GitHub Actions or CI/CD. Now the GitHub Actions that we were using earlier, those were based on the Google Drive that we have, Google. Google account that we have created on GCP. However, now we are using the AWS services. So because of that, we will be using the S3 and ECR. So when we'll go to, so for credentials, what we'll do, we'll go to settings, and then in settings, we'll do new repository secret. In that secret, I'll enter my AWS credentials, AWS access key ID, AWS secret access key, and AWS account ID. And particularly these things I am updating so that I could use these things in my code or in the Docker file that I have. Or I think mostly we are using these things in the GitHub actions that we are using. So in this, there's a one GitHub Actions marketplace which comes with a lot of predefined actions which are useful to us, and it's a good, if you're starting, it's a good practice to write these GitHub Actions by yourself. However, with time you can explore the marketplace and use whatever actions that you require. So here we are going to use the ones that are one that is created by AWS. So this one says like configure AWS credential event, and this will use to configure AWS credential environment variables for using other GitHub actions. And second thing is like we'll use Jay Walton's action on GitHub that is by the name of by the name GHECR's push event, which we will use to push pull the image to the ECR that we have. In that particularly, we'll use this YAML code. And similar to what we discussed earlier, the name is creating Docker container. Jobs it will do is like MLOps container. It will run on Ubuntu latest. And then for defaults, the I think working directory is week 7 ECR. The steps are required, I think, like with these are all just providing details, and the steps will be the Docker build with these credentials. And then I think like these are just the credentials. Yeah. So when we do everything like now after this, what when we start the action on GitHub, it will show us to in action tab. It will show something like it is this, and in that particularly, it took all the details automatically. Now, if there are any changes, we just make the changes in the model. We push that particular model in GitHub, or and GitHub and update our S3 bucket, and then automatically everything will be continuously tested and then later on pushed to our ECR. Now in this particular session, we check like how we can automatically create a Docker image using GitHub Actions and then save it to ECR. Also, we saw like how we can use S3 as the remote storage. So that's it for this particular session. In case if you have any feedback or doubts, please let me know in the comments, and let's see you in the next session. Thank you.